औज़ुबिल्लाहि मिनश्शैतानिर्रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम सुब्हानल्लाहि वल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि वला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह वल्लाहु अकबर वलिल्लाहिल हम्द अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर अशहदु अन ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह अशहदु अन ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह अशहदु अन्ना मुहम्मद रसूलुल्लाह अशहदु अन्ना मुहम्मदन रसूलुल्लाह अशहदु अन्ना अमीरल मोमिनीना व इमामल मुत्तकीना अलियन हुज्जतुल्लाह अशहदु अन्ना अमीरल मोमिनीना व इमामल मुत्तकीना अलियन हुज्जतुल्लाह मुहम्मद हय्या अलस्सलाह हय्या अलस्सलाह हय्या अलल फलाह हय्या अलल फलाह हय्या अला खैरिल अमल हय्या अला खैरिल अमल अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मदिन व आलि मुहम्मद
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنزل آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لا مرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بسر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنتم بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسن على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآيات لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآيات لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك التقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآيات لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم تنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنات اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولا هم ما يدعون سلام قول من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا الصراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لتمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره نكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يروا الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل له من الشجر الأكثر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو خلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات
पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत असगर को क़त्लगाह में लाए हुसैन जब रोते हुए फुरात ने देखे वो सूखे लब, असगर के होंठ सूख के सबब देखे तो खुद पुकार के बोला जहाँ का रब, ए जिब्राइल कह दो जरा बस हुसैन बस, अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ बस हुसैन बस। सोज़े अलम से अर्श पे रोते थे अंबिया, चिल्ले में तीर जोड़ रहा था जो हुरमला, इस इम्तिहान सब्र पे खुद मौत ने कहा, बानों के महलका को बचा बस हुसैन बस, अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ बस हुसैन बस। ईसा जिगर फिगार थे, मूसा थे अश्कबार, दाऊद दे रहे थे सदारों के बार बार, करबो बला में थी यही अय्यूब की पुकार, अरे मुँह को कले जाने लगा बस हुसैन बस, अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ बस हुसैन बस। सलमान अपने तख्ते हवाई पे रोते थे, यूसुफ ये जुल्म देख के बेहोश होते थे, दाऊद तश्ते क़ल्ब में अश्कों के बोते थे, आदम की आ रही थी सदा बस हुसैन बस, अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ बस हुसैन बस। तड़पा जो तीर खा के वो बानों का नौनिहाल, असगर के खून से चेहरा सरवर हुआ जोला, कहने लगा रसूल से तब रब्बे ज़ुल जलाल, कहिए के ज़ब्त हद से बढ़ा बस हुसैन बस, अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ बस हुसैन बस। ज़हरा लहद से आ गई करती हुई बुका, मौला अली नजफ से चले गम में मुब्तला। कहते थे खाक उड़ा के हुसैन व मुसीबता, कोहे अलम ज़मी पे गिरा, बस हुसैन बस। अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ, बस हुसैन बस। ज़ैनब जो अपने बच्चों के मरने पे चुप रही, जो वाक़िफ़े मिज़ाज शहे तिश्ना काम थी, उस वक्त उसके सब्र की दीवार गिर गई। अरे बोली गिरा के सर से रिदा, बस हुसैन बस। अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ, बस हुसैन बस। ओ मेरो बाब झूले पे लिपटी ये कहती थी, या रब मुझे अजीज है असग़र की जिंदगी, कुछ भी तेरी कनीज़ ने मांगा नहीं कभी। अरे दे हुक्म शह को मेरे खुदा, बस हुसैन बस। अब इम्तिहान ख़त्म हुआ, बस हुसैन बस। सलावत।
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa. Tonight's majlis is sponsored for the Saleh Soul of Marhuma Zakira Batul Baidamji and Marhum Abbas Ali Nazari. Please recite Surah Fatiha for these Marhumin. Been requested to recite 5 times Amma Yujibu, and remember all those that are ill and sick within our community and around the world. Let us recite 5 times Amma Yujibu for their quick and complete recovery. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mudtarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. فاتح شفاء مرضى. ومحمد وآل محمد صلوات.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله فاز من اعتصم بحبلكم وأمن من لجأ إلى حسنكم يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا آمنا به صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. Respected scholars, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the honor and the opportunity to once again congregate and to commemorate the Shahadat of Imam Hasan Askari salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. When we examine the lives of Imam, the 11th infallible of the household of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that there is certain areas of his life which is very, very different compared to his father and his forefathers that came before him. In the sense that the way he acted out his responsibilities, being the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was very different compared to how his forefathers used to carry out their representatives. And of course, him being the father of the Imam of our time, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, number one, our condolences to the Imam of our time, and number two, to discuss his history, to discuss the circumstances surrounding his life and how it affected his responsibilities as being the deputy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, it becomes pertinent for us to discuss these things. When you examine, for example, some of his ahadith, and he has wonderful ahadith explaining to us how we should live our lives. You see, the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, on the one hand, they used to be known as scholars of their time. They used to have the highest level and the caliber of ilm. That even, for example, the scholars in their contemporary times used to admit that there was no man like, for example, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam or Imam al-Qadim alayhi salam. That their knowledge was of a different level altogether. You find, for example, Tabari in his Tariq, when he speaks about the saga of Karbala, he narrates from Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Imam Baqir was 3 years old when Karbala took place. Yet you find Tabari comes forward and he says that yes, despite the fact that he was 3 years old, I trust him because he was an alim from amongst the ulama. So when you look at the Ahlul Bayt, they were considered to be foremost in knowledge. But even in akhlaq, when it comes to the areas of akhlaq, they were spiritual masters as well. And so they would teach their people, they would teach their followers of how to ascend spiritually in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It wasn't just about giving knowledge and giving ilm. It was also teaching the people, the tarbiyah of their followers, of how they can become perfect in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many a times when you read these ahadith, It goes back to the basic principles of how we should act in front of others. You find, for example, Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam says in one hadith, he says, خَيْرُ إِخْوَانُكَ مَنْ نَسَ ذَنْبُكَ إِلَيْهِ. He says the one who oppresses you, or the one who, for example, takes away your right, or someone who belittles you in the eyes of others, someone does wrong to you, the best of you are those who are willing to forget this and move on. Forgive and forget. This is how brotherhood is created within a community. This is how you and I progress as a community. All of us carrying out our individual responsibilities. In a different narration, he says, أَوْرَعُ النَّاسِ مَنْ وَقَفَ عِنْدَ الشُّبْهَةِ. He says, the best of you, the most spiritual of you are those who stand firm. They stop when there is a doubt. Sometimes, for example, when I'm about to do something, I doubt, is this halal or haram? I don't know what the answer is. But I say to myself, because I don't know what the answer is, there is a possibility that it's halal. But there is a possibility that it's haram. But I'll go ahead and I'll do it as well. Everything is halal until I come to know that it's haram. But here Imam Hasan al-Askari comes forward and he says that whenever there is a doubt that enters our mind on certain things in our actions, this is where I draw the red line. This is where I turn my back towards that particular action. Here, I as the follower of the Imam alayhi salam, I develop spirituality from this area. But then, let's be honest, when we come towards these different narrations, in one narration, for example, the Imam says, Al-ghadab miftahun likulli shar, that anger is the key to all evils. It's a wonderful hadith. Relationships are broken because of anger. Yes, people in the community, for example, because relationships between brothers is destroyed because one person acts out in anger instead of his intellect. So when we read these ahadith of the Imam alayhi salam, I say to myself, but you know what, I've read all of these different ahadiths, maybe they're worded differently from the other Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. I turn to, for example, Nahj al-Balagha. Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha has profound ahadith. Each and every one of these ahadith teach me how I can develop myself spiritually. What makes the ahadith of Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam different compared to that of his forefathers? It's different because when you examine the context that he said these riwayat, under the situation when he mentioned these riwayat, it gives extra flavor to his narrations. So therefore, in today's discussion or tonight's discussion, I want to discuss 3 areas of his life. Number 1, why did the Bani Abbas forcefully move Imam Hadi alayhi salam from the city of Medina to Samarra? Because as you know, Imam Hadi alayhi salam, Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam, they were forcefully moved to Samarra. Why? Number 2, how many prisons did Imam Hasan al-Askari go throughout his life? Number 3, knowing that he went through that many prisons in his life, how was he able to fulfill his responsibilities as the Imam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the deputy of Allah in front of the people? And what did he prioritize in terms of his message? So let's discuss these 3 areas. Number 1, when the question is raised, why was Imam Hadi alayhi salam forcefully moved? Where he had to migrate by force from the city of Medina to Samarra. Here the scholars came forward and they gave us 3 answers in particular. So there were 3 reasons, but these 3 reasons can be summarized into one point. It was because of jealousy and fear of the Bani Abbas that they decided to move the family of the Ahlul Bayt from the city of Medina to Samarra. Jealousy of what? Fear of what? You have an Imam alayhi salam who has no intentions rising against the Bani Abbas. The Imams alayhi salam, all they cared about was reviving the sunnah of the Holy Prophet. Why were they so fearful of the Imam alayhi salam? They say here they gave 3 different answers. The first answer was because of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Imam al-Rida, his wafat we commemorated a week ago. What does Imam al-Rida have to do with this? Imam al-Rida, they say when Ma'mun made him the crown prince, he placed Imam al-Rida under the spotlight whenever he could. He invited scholars from all corners of the world to come towards his courthouse and to debate with the Imam, with the intention to belittle the Imam, to humiliate the Imam alayhi salam. If the Imam in one of his argument loses, in one of his debate is destroyed by his opponent, then that would bring humiliation to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And this was Ma'mun's intentions. But you found one debate after another. And we have hundreds of debates recorded by the historians that Imam al-Rida alayhi salam engaged in. And he won each and every single one of those debates. He was powerful in his discussions, in his dialogues against his opponents. From the Christians, from the Jews, from the Sunnah, from the Sufis, from, for example, against the atheists. The Imam alayhi salam always had an upper hand in all of his discussions. That is why he was known as Alim Muhammad. He was known as the scholar from the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Now, when he was profound, and because he was always on top in majority of his discussions, all of his discussions, you found that people were slowly coming towards the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. They became Shi'as because of his knowledge. In the olden days, what would happen is that when you had a muballigh, he wouldn't go to a village somewhere and debate with the people, the commoners. They would debate with whom? The ulama from these commoners. They would debate with the scholars of their city, of a particular city. If the scholar is defeated in his debates and his dialogues, that scholar would recognize the truth and then he would come towards the path of Islam. When you have someone like a scholar that comes towards the path of Islam, then you find that all of the people that follow him, from the layman, from the commoners, they naturally come towards the path of Islam as well. You look at the example of Allama Hilli. Allama Hilli, when he debates the sunnah of his time in front of the king, he realizes that in his debates, Allama Hilli was truthful. And so in that spot, in that point, he comes towards the madhab of the Ahl al-Bayt. When the king comes towards the madhab of the Ahl al-Bayt, you found that he demands that his entire empire comes towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. So you found that Allama Hilli in his single discussions, he was able to convert thousands of individuals to come towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. This is the power when you discuss with the ulama and not with the commoners. Imam al-Rida, he used to debate with the ulama. Imagine, they say that one of the ulama was from the land of Sindh, India, a Catholic from India. He debated with the Imam, he lost in his arguments, he comes and he converts to the religion of Islam. He accepts the wilayah of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. Now imagine if he went back to India, he would have been able to convert his entire nation, his entire village or town or whatever it is, towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. So naturally, because Imam al-Rida alayhi salam was powerful in his debates, was always on top in his debates, naturally people started flocking towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Now you had Shias coming towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt, people coming towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt from different areas of the empire. In Qom, in Khurasan, in Tus, Baghdad, Basra, Kufa. All of these places, people were now following the Ahl al-Bayt. Their population began to rise in the millions. And the Bani Abbas saw this as a threat. They couldn't control how many people were coming towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. But they could control what they could do. They could control the movements of the Ahl al-Bayt themselves. So he commands that Imam Hadi alayhi salam, as well as his family, along with him, Imam Hasan al-Askari, to be migrated or to be moved towards Samarra. Number one. Number two, at the same time, you found that there were many insurrections, many revolutions being led by the Alawiyin, by the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhi salam. So on the one hand, you had people coming towards the path of the Ahl al-Bayt. On the other hand, you had revolutions being organized by the followers of the Ahl al-Bayt. So this was a threat to them as well. So because of this reason, the Imams were forced to move from Medina to Samarra. The third reason, and very importantly, let's go back to the hadith of Rasulullah. Rasulullah, what does he say? And this hadith is tawatur. That even in our polemical discussions with our brothers, the Ahlul Sunnah, we use this hadith. Rasulullah would come forward multiple times throughout his life. Many a times in his life, he would come and he would say that there are 12 successors after me. And there are many different variations of this hadith. Many different vocabs are used in this hadith. 12 princes, 12 successors, 12 lights, 12 wazirs. All of these hadith point towards the 12 imams. That there are 12 leaders that will come after me. In some narrations, he names them one by one who these 12 leaders are. The first one being Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and the final being Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. This hadith is mutawatir, meaning not a single scholar can deny the authenticity of this hadith. How do you applicate this hadith? How can you, for example, use this hadith in real life application? Can you apply it to the Bani Umayyah and say that these are the 12 rulers that the Holy Prophet was talking about? No, of course not. The reason being is, number one, because the Bani Umayyah, there were more than 12. And number two, the Bani Abbas, you can't apply it to the Bani Abbas either, because there were more than 12 as well. Who can you apply it to? You can only apply it to our madhab, because we believe in the 12 princes, the 12 imams. And it goes perfectly in line, corroboration with this hadith of the Prophet of Allah. The Bani Abbas knew of this hadith. They knew of this hadith. They knew that Imam al-Rida was the 8th alayhi salam. They knew Imam al-Jawad was the 9th alayhi salam. They knew Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was the 10th. They knew Imam Hasan al-Askari was the 11th. They knew that Imam Hasan al-Askari will give birth to a son who is the 12th. And this was a threat to them and their empire. Why? Because we have within our du'as, we have within the narrations that when the 12th al-Qa'im stands, he will lead a revolution. The darkness, the oppression that has engulfed this world, he will come and bring light. He will bring justice. He will destroy the oppressive regimes that exist in the world. The Bani Abbas knew they were oppressors. It's not like they didn't know that they were oppressors. They knew they used to consume and violate the rights of the people by eating from Bayt al-Mal. But they also knew that if Imam al-Mahdi is born, this is a threat to their empire. Just like how Fir'aun was scared when they came to him and said that Musa will be born in your lands amongst your people who will dispose of you in the future. So what does Fir'aun do? He begins to kill the infant sons, one after the other. This Fir'aun didn't know from which family Musa will come from, alayhi salam. But the Bani Abbas knew exactly from which lineage Imam Mahdi will be born. And so they kept close surveillance on Imam Hasan al-Askari, alayhi salam. They kept close surveillance on him to make sure that Imam al-Mahdi is not born. So to keep this eye on the A'imma alayhim salam, they transferred the Imam from Medina towards the lands of Samarra. Why Samarra? Because the caliphate was based in Samarra itself. Now, when they came towards Samarra, they say that in that particular point in time, historians say that this was the weakest time for the Bani Abbas. Why was this seen as the weakest time for the Bani Abbas? Because the Bani Abbas were rulers, but they were not really rulers. They were controlled by whom? By the Atrak, the Turks. The Turks, initially, they were called in by the Bani Abbas to support them through military warfare. So the Turks, they came into the Muslim empire and they began supporting the Bani Abbas through military areas or affairs. Sooner or later, they had more power and they overpowered the Bani Abbas themselves. It's as if that the Turks, they were the puppeteers. The Bani Abbas, they were controlled by the decisions of the Turks. The historians, they say that even the money that is being used from Bayt al-Mal, the Turks had control over it majority of the times. Even the money, the Bani Abbas were not able to use it freely for their own selves. The Turks had absolute power over the Bani Abbas. There's an interesting poet from one of the lines of in history. They say, خَلِيفَةٌ فِي قَفَسٍ بَيْنَ وَسِيفٍ وَبَغَى يَقُولُ مَا قَالَ لَهُ كَمَا تَقُولُ الْبَبَغَاء. What does it mean? It says that the Khalifa is in a cage between Wasif and Bagha. Wasif is one of the ministers in Turkish ministers, and Bagha is another Turkish minister. It says the Khalifa, the Bani Abbas, they are in a cage between these two influences, between these two individuals. They say to him, or the Khalif says what they say to him like the parrot says. They were absolutely controlled by the Turks. The Bani Abbas knew this. Imagine they had all the power in their hands. They were the supreme, they were the superpowers at that time, but they had no control over their empires whatsoever. And this created hatred in their hearts. They couldn't stand against the Bani Abbas. They were being controlled by they couldn't stand against the Turks because they were being controlled by the Turks. So they took out their anger upon whom? The Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So the Imam al-Hadi as well as Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhim as-salam, they come towards Samarra. When they come towards Samarra, they are immediately placed under house arrest. Their freedom is limited, their freedom is taken away from them. There are detectives, there are spies constantly watching over the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They say that when Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was poisoned and he left this world, Imam Hasan al-Askari began his imamat under house arrest in the time of Mutawakkil. Mutawakkil was a vicious ruler. He was the one who tried to demolish the shrine of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and failed many a times. He is the one who channeled the water to go towards the shrine of the Imam alayhi salam, and the water goes around the shrine. And there's at least 70 times he tries to demolish the haram of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Mutawakkil then leaves. When Mutawakkil leaves, who comes after him? Al-Muntasir. Al-Muntasir, they say he had some affiliation towards the Ahlul Bayt. He returns fadak to the Ahlul Bayt. He shows some kind of flexibility towards the Ahlul Bayt. Now, when Muntasir becomes the leader of the Ummah, the Caliph of the Bani Abbas, all of a sudden there is flexibility given to Imam Hasan al-Askari. So he's no longer under house arrest. He's able to roam the streets just like any other person. But the Turks, they saw that he was very counterproductive to their aims, so they get rid of him immediately. It was only a few months that he reigned, maybe about 6 months or so. After Muntasir, they say Musta'in comes into power. Musta'in, vicious person. Immediately he takes the Imam alayhi salam and places him in prison. So the Imam goes into prison the second time. First, he was under house arrest. Now he's placed in the public prisons. The place where they put the killers and the stealers and all of these different criminals. Even in that time, anyone who was considered to be a Shia, they would be chucked into prison as well. So the Imam alayhi salam is now in the public prisons. He hires a man by the name of Ali ibn Awdamish. Ali ibn Awdamish, he had hatred towards the sons of Abi Talib alayhi salam. Ali ibn Awdamish, they say he came Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Al-Musta'in, he approaches him, he says, I am making you his warden. Do whatever you want with him. You want to kick him, you want to smack him, you want to slap him, you want to torture him, I'm giving you the green light. Do whatever you want. Ali ibn Dawdamish, the hatred he had, Musta'in knew that he would do whatever he wanted to do. He becomes the warden of Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. They say within a few months, the Imam alayhi salam melts his heart. He developed such love for Imam Hasan alayhi salam that the narrations say that whenever he would come into the presence of the Imam, he would place his cheeks on the floor. He would show humility towards the Imam. He would not even raise his eyes to look at the Imam's face. He would always look down before the Imam alayhi salam. This is beautiful. The Imams of the Ahlul Bayt have a power over our nufus, over our souls, that when we enter the presence of the Imam, you find the Imam has the ability to attract us. Yes? The Imam has the power of Jaddabiyah. He has the power to attract even the hardcore enemies. He has the ability to melt even the hardest of hearts. They say, beautiful narration, they say Harun al-Rashid one day went towards Hajj. And whilst he was there in Hajj, he saw Imam Musa al-Qadim alayhi salam alongside the Kaaba. So he came towards Imam Musa alayhi salam and he said to him, you are the one that they secretly come and give bay'at to, isn't it? The Imam replies, he says, there's a difference between you and I. He says, what's the difference? He says, the difference is that you are the Imam of the physical, whereas I am the Imam of the spiritual. You attract the physical aspects of this world, I attract the spiritual aspects of this world. And so Ali ibn Awdamish, he was attracted by the humility of the Imam to the extent that he himself makes himself humble before the Imam alayhi salam. Al-Musta'in, they say he had enough of the Turks. Not so good relationship he had with the Turks, so he goes towards the city of Baghdad. He leaves Samarra, he goes towards Baghdad. The Turks tell him, come back to Samarra. He refuses. He says, I will rule from Baghdad. He says, there will be consequences if you go to Baghdad. He says, it doesn't matter. He goes to Baghdad, they take him, they imprison him, they place him in prison. When they place him in prison, then the new caliph comes forth, Al-Mu'taz. Al-Mu'taz, at the time when Musta'in was placed in prison, Mu'taz was in prison. So the Turks take out Mu'taz from prison, they give bay'at to him, they tell him, you are the new leader, the new caliph of the empire. Mu'taz and Musta'in were brothers. Mu'taz, when he becomes the new Abbasid caliph, he takes his brother out of prison and he executes him. He orders his execution, he kills his own brother. Mu'taz, they say he had a hard heart towards the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And he was very direct. So he said, look, Imam Hasan al-Askari, he's a threat to us. Take him and put him back into prison. So he is placed into prison again. Now when Imam Hasan al-Askari is in prison, Mu'taz turns to one of his wazirs, the warden, and he tells him, he says, go to this land, there is a palace in that land, the palace of Ibn Hubayra. Take the Imam towards that palace and kill him, but make sure, la yaraka ahada, make sure that no one sees you. The Imam couldn't be executed publicly. He was the Imam and there were millions of Shias there. There would be a chaos in the lands, in the Muslim lands. So they had to do it privately. So he says to him, take the Imam to the palace of Ibn Hubayra and kill him. Come back and tell the people that we took the Imam towards the palace, but something happened, there was a freak accident and the Imam died. People will believe us and then they will move on. Allah protects the Imam alayhi salam. How? They concocted this plan, but it never actualized, it never materialized. They became so busy in their affairs that all of a sudden this plan that they had concocted, that they came up with, all of a sudden died down. And it died down very quickly. Mu'taz, he was severe with Imam Hasan al-Askari. So the Imam prays to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, protect me from the evils of Mu'taz. Allah answers this dua and he removes Mu'taz. How does he remove Mu'taz? They say Mu'taz for a while stopped paying the salaries of the Turks. They came to him, they said, Mu'taz, pay us our salary. Imagine the military, they were not being paid. The employers, they were not being paid. The workers, they were not being paid. We have certain countries in the world, you have millionaires, billionaires, yes, they have multinational companies, but they're not paying their workers, they're not paying the wages of their employees. At the same time, they're hosting birthday parties worth millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, but they're not able to pay their employees their wages. So what happens? They demand their wages to be paid. Al-Mu'taz, he replies, there's no money in the Bayt al-Mal. All the money has been used. He said, we don't care. We want our wages to be paid. Mu'taz goes to his mother. He says, Mom, help me. His mother was known to be an affluent woman, very rich. She refuses to help Mu'taz. She says that I don't have anything. This is your affair, you sort it out. They capture Mu'taz because he wasn't paying up. They captured him, they imprisoned him, they tortured him, then they killed him. When they killed him, they roamed. They came towards his mother and they raided her home. In her home, they found 500 dinars. In the secret safe, under the floorboards, they found 1.3 million dinars. And they found 3 boxes. One box was filled with yaqut, rubies. The second box was filled with emeralds. And the third box was filled with pearls. Then they made fun of her. You gave up your son's life for 50,000 dinars. That's what he owed us. Whilst you hoarded all of this wealth for yourself. What kind of a mother are you? They made fun of her. Mu'taz was then killed by the Turks. Then you had the new caliph, Muhtadi. Muhtadi, when he came into power, he publicly had animosity towards the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. He would publicly come and say that I will kill and get rid of Imam Hasan al-Askari as well as his Shi'as. Imam Hasan al-Askari was again placed in prison at this time. He kept on coming out, in and out, in and out. When Muhtadi came into power, he went back into prison. Then the Shias began writing letters to the Imam alayhi salam. They said to him, look, Muhtadi is publicly threatening us and our lives. The Imam alayhi salam replies to these letters, he says, don't worry. بعد 3 أيام يأتيكم الفرج. After 3 days, you will see some faraj, you will see some ease from Muhtadi. After 3 days, Muhtadi is removed by the Turks because they didn't like him very much. He ruled for less than a year. After Muhtadi, you had Mu'tamid. Mu'tamid, when he came into power, what he does is he takes the Imam again and he places him in prison. This time he appoints a warden and he tells this warden, he says, look, the Imam, I've placed him in prison. I want you to watch over him. Whatever he says, whatever conversation he has with his prison mates, whatever he writes, whatever is written to him, report it back to me. He says, fine. A few days later, a week later, he comes towards the warden. He tells him, what's going on? Give me the report. And the warden tells Mu'tamid, he says, look, first of all, the Imam has no intentions to rise against you and take away your power. He has no inspirations to lead an uprising against you. Number two, I've seen him fast during the day and pray during the night. This person is busy in his own affairs even when he is in prison. Few days later, he comes back to the warden. He says, give me the report. What's Imam Hasan al-Askari up to, alayhi salam? He gives the same report. He says he has no intentions whatsoever. He fasts during the day and he prays during the night. He says, fine. Mu'tamid makes a decision. He says, take the Imam out of the prison. There's no point wasting our resources on him. Tell him to go back home. The Imam is now placed under house arrest. Before he leaves the prison, they say Ja'far, his brother, was also placed in prison by Mu'tamid alongside the Imam alayhi salam. Before he leaves prison, he tells the warden, he says, I will not leave until my brother comes with me, Ja'far. The warden tells him, but ijazah has been given to you and you alone. He says, I don't care. I will not leave prison until my brother is with me. So the warden goes back to Mu'tamid. Mu'tamid gives ijazah for both of them to go home. Imam Hasan al-Askari returns to his home. From this moment onwards until the final years of his life, until his final breath, he is now under house arrest. Question comes up. The Imam, as we saw, moved from one prison to another, from one caliph to another. From the time he became the Imam of the Ahl al-Bayt until his final breath in dunya, he was in prison. He was only free for a matter of days or weeks or even perhaps just a few months. How was he able to fulfill his responsibility as the Imam of the people, as the representative of Allah? Because the Imam, his responsibility is to protect the message of Rasulullah. As in the Imam alayhi salam didn't have the opportunity to go to the masjid and give, for example, lessons and hold classes and give majalis. No Friday sermons in his authority, nothing. The Imam couldn't write books. The Imam couldn't, for example, have discussions like Imam al-Rada alayhi salam was able to have discussions and debates. The Imam was constantly in prison. How was he able to defend the message of Rasulullah? Here, the scholars came forward and said that the Imam alayhi salam focused on just a few areas. The main priority he had, which was to instill into the hearts of his believers and followers, was the coming of Al-Qa'im, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. The Imam did not care much for answering questions. That wasn't his priority. It was a priority, but it was a secondary priority. The primary priority of the Imam was to make sure that the people are ready to follow an Imam who is not there physically with them. So how does the Imam do this? The Imam does this in three ways, three strategies that he employs. Number one, he says to the people, the first thing that he uses, that he employs, is that the way he speaks about his son Imam al-Mahdi. Now when you look at the concept of Mahdiism in Islam, there are thousands of riwayat, thousands of narrations, spanning from the time of the Holy Prophet all the way to Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam. Each infallible has spoken of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, which shows us that this topic in itself is pertinent. The fact that every single Imam spanning through 12 generations has spoken about the Imam alayhi salam in such a way is not something that is to be ignored. So, the scholars came forward and said, but when you examine these types of narrations, you'll find that there is a striking difference between how the 12 Imams would speak, how the 12 infallibles would speak about Imam Mahdi and how Imam Hasan al-Askari spoke about Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. From the time of the Holy Prophet, including the Holy Lady Az-Zahra alayhi salam, including all of the Imams that came after Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, they would speak about Imam Mahdi in a very general way. His name is the name of the Holy Prophet. His kunya is this. He will do this. This is the prophecy. He will be in Ghaibat al-Sughra and then he will go into Ghaibat al-Kubra. All of these things are generally spoken about Imam Mahdi. But Imam Hasan al-Askari, he makes it very specific when he speaks about his son. He says, my son, Imam al-Mahdi, my son, he will do this. My son, he will do that. He's trying to infuse into the hearts of the people that my son is coming. We're not talking about, for example, years and decades later. We're talking about days now. We're talking about very limited days when the Qa'im will be born and will come into dunya. The example that the scholars give is the example of death. You and I, each and every one of us know that we will die one day. Some of us sooner than later, some of us later than sooner. May Allah postpone our deaths, inshallah. حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. When each and every one of us will be confronted by yaqeen. Yaqeen is what? Death. Each and every one of us know that death will overpower us. One day though. Let me give you another example. Imagine the doctor came to you and said, look, I'm sorry, you have a few days to live. You have a week to live. Your perception of death will change. You'll prepare your will. You'll try and mend all of your relationships. You'll prepare to leave this world. There's a difference between me knowing that one day I'll die and me knowing that in 2 days I'll die because of an illness that I have. My whole reality and the way I interact with death changes entirely. And so here, this was the example that is given by the ulama when it comes to Imam al-Mahdi. For generations, the A'imma, when they would speak about Imam al-Mahdi, it would all be theoretical. But now in the time of Imam Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam, it was now actualizing, it was materializing, it was now becoming a reality. And the Imam had to make the people ready for it. How does the Imam make the people ready for it? He begins to send letters and he begins to inform them that a time will come when they will not have direct communication with the Imam of their time. He sends a letter to the father of Sheikh al-Saduq. Sheikh al-Saduq, a prominent scholar within our madhab. His father was a contemporary of Imam Hasan al-Askari. Imam al-Hasan al-Askari sends a letter to the father of Sheikh al-Saduq. He says, فَعَلَيْكَ بِالصَّبْرِ وَالْإِنْتِظَارِ فَإِنَّ الْإِنْتِظَارِ أَفْضَلُ الْأَعْمَالِ. In the time of ghaibah, he says that for you it is wajib upon you to have patience, number one, and to wait, actively wait. The best amal to perform in the state of ghaibah, in the time of ghaibah, is to actively wait for the Imam alayhi salam. This was one strategy that his entire way and way of speaking about Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam was very specific. It was drenched with seriousness. The second way was when he chose to cut off communications with his Shi'as. The Imam alayhi salam had to prepare the people that a time will come when you will not have direct communication with your Imam, with the Imam of your time. So the Imam had to cut back his interactions with the people of his time. They say that the Imam alayhi salam in the beginning years of his imamah, in the time of Mu'tamid places him under house arrest with the condition that only 2 days a week he has to report to the governor. Mondays and Thursdays. Every Mondays and Thursdays, the Imam has to come out of his house. That's the only time he was allowed to come out of his house and go see the governor of the time, the caliph of the time. And there was a specific route that the Imam would take. And the Shias knew what route that was. So every Mondays and Thursdays, they would come and they would stand on the side of the roads, waiting for the Imam alayhi salam. When they would see the Imam, they would see happiness in their hearts. But then at time, one narrator, he narrates, he says that one day I was standing alongside the road and I saw my Imam walking on the road, going towards the Caliph. He said, my heart was so moved that I wanted to shout in front of all of the people that were there, هَذَا خَلِيفَةُ اللَّهِ فِي أَرْضِهِ وَهُجَّتُهُ فِي خَلْقِهِ. He says, this is the true Caliph of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, I felt like saying this. All of a sudden the Imam came towards me. He started walking towards me until there was a very small gap between him and I. When he approached me, he did this. Meaning what? Meaning, hold on a second, there are people watching you. There are spies that are following me. There are police officers that are watching over me. If you were to say this, they will come and they will kill you. This is not the time of hadith and kalam. Whatever you say, keep it to yourself. Right now it's wajib that you remain silent. So these people, they could not communicate with the Imam. At most, they were able to see the Imam and that's it. After a while, the Imam was completely placed under house arrest. This idea of him seeing the governor or the caliph on Mondays and Thursdays, this stopped altogether. Now the Imam was completely under house arrest. He was not allowed to leave his house. And no one was allowed to come into his home either. Only those who were selling some stuff, they were allowed to come towards his home. And so they say that there was a man who came towards the house of the Imam alayhi salam. He knocks on the door. From outside, he wants to speak with the Imam. But there's a problem. The problem is that everyone is watching. Who's coming towards the house, what they're saying, and so on and so forth. They say in one circumstance, the servant opens the door and he begins to speak with this person. The person says, I'm here to see the Imam. He says the Imam is unavailable at the moment. But in reality, the Imam was behind the door. The Imam was behind the door communicating with this person, but in the apparent, it seemed as if the servant was talking to the person. And so the Imam had to be very strategic in the way he was communicating with his Shias. But even then, his communications was very little. It had to stop sooner or later. So this was the second way in which the Imam alayhi salam begins to prepare his nation towards the coming of Al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The third way was to develop the system of wukala, the system of assigning representatives who would come and communicate with the Imam rather than the commoners, the people, to come and communicate with the Imam directly. It's easier to communicate with 1, 2, or 3 people than communicating with thousands of people. The idea behind this was that Imam Askari alayhi salam was trying to establish a system where one day the people, the Shias, will not have direct communications with the Imam, but they will have communications with those who represent the Imam alayhi salam. And those are the fuqaha of our time. So the Imam alayhi salam in certain parts of the Muslim empire has many representatives. There were a couple of representatives in northern Africa. There were representatives in, for example, Baghdad, in Basra, in Kufa, in Mecca, Medina. They say, for example, in Qom, there was a man by the name of Ahmed ibn Ishaq. The Imam appoints him as a rep. Ahmed ibn Ishaq, they say he came towards the Imam one time and he said, Yabna Rasulillah, write me a letter so that I am able to see your handwriting. So that whenever you send me letters, at least I can identify that it's from you, rather than, for example, having to worry about whether the Bani Abbas have forged a letter. So the Imam alayhi salam writes him a letter. Then you have, for example, Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Umari or Amari. This person, he was the companion of the 10th Imam, the 11th Imam, as well as the 12th Imam. He was the first Na'ib from amongst the Nawa'ib of Imam Sahib al-Asr. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, they call him Az-Zayyat or As-Samman. Meaning what? Meaning that he was an oil seller. So whenever he wanted to communicate with the Imam alayhi salam, he would use his occupation to find an excuse to meet the Imam alayhi salam. He was officially assigned and inaugurated as a rep. So the people used to come towards him. They used to give him his khums or their zakat, and they would say, can you give this to the Imam of our time? He would then hide these coins in the bottles of oil. He would come towards the Imam pretending to sell oil, and then he would pass on these monies. At times, no, the Imam gave him ijazah to spend khums, for example, wherever he saw fit. So then, he would then go and he would spend the money in his community. Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, he was one of the fuqaha of the time. And yet he was an oil seller. He represented the Imam and he represented the son, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, after him as well. He was the first Naib in the time of Ghaybat al-Sughra. Beyond that, you found that the Imam alayhi salam began to communicate with his representatives by writing letters. And you have to keep in mind that many a times the Imam alayhi salam wasn't just, for example, answering Q&A questions. It wasn't just answering fiqh questions and aqaidi questions. People used to come towards the Imam seeking fulfillment for their needs. They used to use the Imam as wasila. At one point they say one companion writes a letter to the Imam alayhi salam. He says, Ya Imam, my wife is about to deliver. We don't know whether it's a son or a daughter, but we want you to name our child. Pray for her safety. Pray for the safety of our child. The Imam responds back through the Naib, through his representative, saying and writing back that don't worry, she is under the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your wife will give birth to twins. Name one of them Muhammad, name the other Abdurrahman. So you find that the Imam would constantly fulfill the needs of their people. Whenever someone was sick, they would write a letter towards the Imam alayhi salam. Ariza, we have Ariza today, yes, 15th of Sha'ban. They would write a letter towards the Imam alayhi salam. Ya Imam, pray for my sickness. Ya Imam, I have brothers and sisters in prison. Pray for their safety. Ya Imam, I have this need that needs to be fulfilled. Pray for me. The Imam would help them again and again and again through writing letters. The Imam, if whenever there was a misunderstanding within the communities, because at times, what would happen is that whenever the Imam appointed someone as a representative, the people would doubt, is this person really the representative of the Imam or not? Maybe he's lying, maybe he's telling the truth, we don't know. So the Imam alayhi salam would write a letter to the people saying that he is the rep. Follow him. Everything that you have or any need that you have from me, approach him so that they can approach us. At times the Imam would appoint someone and that person would be consumed by the world. There's one representative in particular, he was consumed by the wealth of this world, to the extent that the Imam writes a letter saying, do not follow him anymore, he's no longer my representative. So the Imam constantly began to communicate with his community through the representatives by writing letters. And number three, and finally, you find that the Imam alayhi salam began to engage in the tarbiyah of his community by writing letters as well. Remember the ahadith that we began with? Yes, these ahadith, these spiritual ahadith was how he used to train his Shias, knowing that he was under arrest, behind closed walls. And this is beautiful about the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. Whether you give them a leadership position, whether they are considered to be caliphs in the Muslim nation, whether they are placed in prison like Imam Kadhim alayhi salam or Imam Hasan al-Askari, they will always find a way to protect the message of Rasulullah. They will always find a way, a method to protect the legacy of the Holy Prophet of Islam. And they will leave behind their own legacies that will never be forgotten. This is the power of the A'immah alayhim as-salam. Whether you lock them up or you set them free, they will find a way to protect the message. And so you find, when the name of Imam Hasan al-Askari was in the tongues of the people of Samarra, his message, his teachings were now being spread amongst the people, and they began praising his names. They began singing his praises. And this brought jealousy into the hearts of Mu'tamid. Mu'tamid then decides, he says that whatever we do, whether we place him in prison, whether we set him free, he always has the power to encapsulate the hearts of the people. We have to get rid of him. So he decides to poison the Imam alayhi salam. He administers the poison, the Imam consumes the poison, and it begins to affect his body. When it affects his body, he dies from it. He then returns to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the time when Imam al-Mahdi comes publicly in front of the people and he tells the people that I am the new Imam after my father. Until that time, no one knew of the existence of the Imam alayhi salam. Now the Imam has exposed himself publicly. When Mu'tamid finds out that the Mahdi has come, he immediately sends soldiers to go and to kill him. This is the time when Imam al-Mahdi goes into Ghaybat al-Sughra. But before he goes into Ghaybat al-Sughra, they say he comes publicly and he begins to recite Salat al-Mayyit. The Imam's body is respected, it is honored. His Shias came towards his body and they buried his body. The ghusl was given, the kafan was given, and the salah was recited, and the dafn was given. But we say to the Imam alayhi salam, we say, Yabna Rasulullah, when we turn towards your grandfather Abi Abdullah, we see that on the 10th of Muharram there was no respect given to his body. We say to him, Yabna Rasulullah, at least your son performed salah over your body. There was no salah over the body of Abi Abdullah. This was the time when Umar ibn Sa'ad demands that the 10 horse riders, they come towards the body of Abi Abdullah. And they began trampling on the body of Abi Abdullah. When the hooves of the horses began digging into the chest of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. On the 10th of Muharram, it's narrated that when the battle finished, the enemies came rushing towards the tents of the women. They came towards the women of Ala Muhammad and they began burning these tents. حتى ينادي المنادي احرقوا بيوت الظالمين, until they used to say amongst themselves, go towards these tents and burn the houses, burn the tents of Ala Muhammad. They came towards these tents. They saw the women escaping these tents, moving from one tent to another. Zainab then turns to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, what should we do? Imam Sajjad says to Zainab, Ya Ammati, run, escape these tents, run towards the deserts of Karbala. Take your women and your children and run towards the deserts of Karbala. They say, Hamid ibn Muslim narrates, he says, when I saw the burning of the tents, I saw one tent in particular that began to burn. The flames were huge, but there was a woman standing outside of this tent, fairly close to the tent. So I turned to this woman and I said to her, oh Zainab, move away from this tent. Zainab, the flames will come towards you, move away from this tent. She did not listen to me. Then I saw her clothes catching fire and I said to her, Zainab, your clothes are on fire. Move away from the tent. Zainab then turned to me and she said to me, oh man, I know that my clothes are on fire, but what can I do? There is a man who cannot move in the middle of this tent. There is a youth that is sick. There is a youth that is ill. A youth that is frail and cannot move. They say that when the tents were being burnt, a small girl came towards Hamid ibn Muslim. Hamid narrates, he says, this girl came towards me and said, Ya Shaykh, have you read the Quran? When the Quran says, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, and as for the yatim, the orphan, be kind towards them, be merciful towards them. He says, I said to the girl, I said, yes, I know about this verse. He says, Ya Shaykh, wallah, I've become a yatim from the household of the Prophet of Allah. Oh man, help me. Hamid says, oh girl, how can I help you? She says to him, take me towards the lands of Najaf. Hamid replies, the lands of Najaf are very far. I cannot take you towards the lands of Najaf. She says, Ya Hamid, Ya Sheikh, take me towards the Furat, take me towards the river, towards the water. Hamid says, I can take you towards the water. He then takes Sakina's hands and he takes her towards the water, towards the Furat. As she comes towards the water, she sees the body of her uncle Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She then throws herself on the body of her uncle. She says, Ya Ammi, oh my uncle, stand and protect me, oh my uncle, look what they did to us after you left us. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. If we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all our marhumin, inshallah. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha.
हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। बोली नरजिस ये बाक़ल्बे मुज़तर, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। उठ गया हाय हादी हमारा, मर गया बेकसों का सहारा। हर तरफ घर में महशर है बरपा, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। था वो बुर्जे सदाकत का गौहर, था वो बुर्जे इमामत का अफ्तर, था वो नूरे निगाहे पैगंबर, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। साल 29वां कैसा आया, साथ वाली का जिसने छुड़ाया। मर गया मुझसे मेरा मुक़द्दर, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। ज़हर कैसा ये कातिल था वारी, जिसने ली जान हाय तुम्हारी। क्यों न टूटा फलक मोतमिद पर, हाय मारा हसन अस्करी को। या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या। साहिबे ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद, 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 साहिबे ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल। रन में शबीर हाज हैं तन्हा, दश्त में लौट गया भरा कुनबा। कश्तियाँ हैं किए हुए नरगा, ऐसे तम का हिसार अल मदद, साहिबे ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद, साहिबे ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल। राह कूफा है शाम का बाजार, है रसन बस्ता ज़ैनबे गमखार। सर खुले बीबियाँ हैं और दरबार, सख्त है राह गुज़ार अल मदद, साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद, साहिब जुल्फ़िकार अल बन के कैदी इमाम जाएंगे, बेड़ियाँ पहने शाम जाएंगे, सरे दरबार आम जाएंगे, होंगे सब शर्म सारे अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार। आप मुश्किल कुशा ज़माने के, आप हाजत रवा ज़माने के, आप खैरुल विरा ज़माने के, साहिब इख्तियार अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार। तुझको किस बात का है गम महशर, तेरे ये गाजी का अलम महशर, बस ये कह के उठा कदम महशर, हश्र के ताजदार अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद साहिब ज़ुल्फ़िकार अल मदद। हुसैन السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك وعلى جدك وأبيك، السلام عليك وأمك وأخيك، السلام عليك على 9 المعصومين من ذريتك وبنيك، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء الفقراء، السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس، السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض طوس، يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى رضا روحي وجسمي قلبي لك الفداء. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ذات إمام حسن عسكري عليه السلام. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أبا محمد الحسن بن حسن العسكري، السلام عليك أيها البر الصادق الوفي، السلام عليك يا ولي أمر الله، السلام عليك يا خادم علم الله، السلام عليك يا ابن حجج الله على بريته. اللهم صل عليه أفضل ما صليت على أحد من أصفيائك وحجتك وأوليائك وذريته ورسلك وأنبيائك، آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان، سيدي الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك إمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم صل على إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات رحم الله من قال الفاتحة.